BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays, I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And in this episode, I will be discussing the Dear Boss letter, responding to the Trading Post's video on Jack the Ripper, and announcing the new book from Michael King, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Jack the Ripper is perhaps the world's most famous serial killer. But we don't know the true identity of Jack the Ripper, so in some ways, that is the irony of the entire mystery. Jack the Ripper is a name that was found on the Dear Boss letter, which was mailed on September 27th of 1888, although its authenticity is highly disputed. The Dear Boss letter was about a page and a half long. It was written on September 25th of 1888, or at the very least that's when it was dated, and then sent and received 2 days later. But specifically, the person who wrote that said that he was giving the name to the Whitechapel murderer. He said that he was giving a trade name to the person who was committing the homicides. Many people believe to this day that the person who wrote the Dear Boss letter was indeed the killer, but ultimately that is the namesake for today's episode. Because I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOR follower Batman66, who introduced me to the YouTube channel The Trading Post last year, which is hosted by Fred and Noodle. And it's a overall general discussion show. They talk about lots of true crime cases, but mostly about unsolved mysteries, as well as things like paranormal events and mythological stories, and that stuff isn't exactly my cup of tea, but I saw that they had 2 videos out on Jack the Ripper, so I couldn't help but respond. I've also done direct responses to the Trading Post videos on the Zodiac Killer, and perhaps more infamously, the episode on D.B. Cooper. It's called D.B. Cooper's Trading Post here on Black Box Online Radio, and I invite you to check out some of my other content. But with the Jack the Ripper episodes, it was a very basic walkthrough of the crimes, starting on August 31st of 1888 with the murder of Polly Nichols, and then moving all the way to November 9th of 1888 with the murder of Mary Kelly. And I found that, aside from just hearing the basic story, I thought that Fred's observations about the unconfirmed Jack the Ripper crimes were much more fascinating, because he started out by talking about the case of Martha Tabram, who was murdered in early August of 1888, perhaps August 7th of 1888, and she is thought by many to have been the first victim of Jack the Ripper. And sometimes it's interesting to see how somebody thinks when they are just a new set of eyes on the case, when they're just giving a fresh take on the subject. And the host, Fred, was looking at how some people are very quick to dismiss Martha Tabram as a Ripper victim, but he points out that this almost seems like the activity of a growing and budding serial killer. This seems like the actions and activities of somebody who wasn't completely familiar with what they were doing. Martha Tabram was stabbed 39 times, and she was found on a first-floor landing at the George Yards buildings. And then about 3 weeks go by before the murder of Polly Nichols. At this time, there is no letter, there's no one taking credit for the crimes, but Polly Nichols is murdered more intensely, and Fred noticed that a lot of people were dismissing Martha Tabram as a Jack the Ripper victim because her throat was not slashed, but he almost viewed it as how a serial killer can attack the first victim in an unplanned way. It's almost as if they start out by committing a crime that was just opportunistic, maybe a little bit more impulsive than their other crimes. But we're going to talk about that in the Wolf in Sheep's Clothing segment, so please stick around. But it's almost as if people were too quick to dismiss Martha Tabram as a Jack the Ripper victim, and I absolutely was in the past. When I first read the story of Martha Tabram, I thought it was nothing like the other victims. And I was like, just because somebody is stabbed does not mean that her body was mutilated in the exact same way as Jack the Ripper's canonical victims. And I had a big reversal on that for almost the exact same reasons. And that's one of the reasons why I like the Trading Post videos, because I can tell that the host Fred has a lot of insights into human behavior. He is also someone who said this in his Zodiac Killer videos, that he thought the Zodiac Killer was inspired by Egyptian mythology, and not a lot of people catch on to that, because the Zodiac Killer said that he was killing because he wanted to have slaves in paradise. He wanted to die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he had killed would be his slaves. And he's like, that sounds like Egyptian mythology, because that's what the pharaohs wanted to do. That was the whole point of mummification. And you don't really get to that point of the Zodiac Killer mystery until you get really, really deep under the surface. I've definitely explored that link in the past, but, he caught on to it real fast. I think he's probably doing the same thing with the murder of Martha Tabram. Now, moving onward, after the murder of Mary Kelly, again, that was November 9th of 1888, we have more unconfirmed crimes, and he was talking about the murder of Rose Mylett, which occurred on December 20th of 1888. And firstly, if we look at the Autumn of Terror, we have a very big concentration of activity that's going to go from August 31st to September 30th, and I do mean that. Even if you include or exclude Martha Tabram as a Jack the Ripper victim, I mean that. There is a very big concentration of activity in regards to the murders. We have crimes on August 31st, September 8th, September 30th, where 2 women are murdered in one night, Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes. So it seems like the killer is acting in a very bloodthirsty way during this period. That's why it's called the Autumn of Terror, although it truly began in the summer. Then, on November 9th of 1888, we have the murder of Mary Kelly, and there's a 5-week gap, an enormous gap. And that's why a lot of people doubt that Mary Kelly was actually killed by the Ripper. I believe she was a Ripper victim, though. But if we're going to talk about time gaps, we have November 9th of 1888, the final confirmed crime, going all the way to the murder of Rose Mylett on December 20th of 1888. And Rose Mylett was murdered, let's see, how many weeks is that going to be? That would be about 6 or 7 weeks after the murder of Mary Kelly. It's 6.5 weeks. So, again, these are very, very odd time gaps. And that would actually be a strike against her being murdered by Jack the Ripper. But the odd thing about Rose Mylett is that she was murdered under very bizarre circumstances. Some people might not believe that she was murdered at all. When I was listening to Martin Fido's program, Murder After Midnight, he stated that he believed that Rose Mylett died from a seizure. And when I had the opportunity to talk to Richard Jones about this, Richard Jones, who runs the Jack the Ripper tour, he said that it's actually a combination of things. They believe that Rose Mylett was strangled with a piece of twine, and then she had a seizure during the strangulation. But as I was listening to Fred's program, The Trading Post, it seemed like he was highly entertaining the alternative theory that perhaps there wasn't a murder at all. Perhaps there is almost a fourth option, that it's not a murder, it's not a seizure, it's not a combination of a murder and a seizure. It would actually be an accident, and that's why Rose Mylett ended up dead on December 20th of 1888. The way the accident would have played out is Rose Mylett got drunk, and she had the piece of twine, and it just got pulled around her neck in an unexpected way, meaning no human pulled the string, maybe something was caught, and she got tangled up in it, and she ultimately was asphyxiated. And before you think that something like that is impossible, I mean, there are other stories like that in the true crime world. I used to be a very big fan of the show Brain Scratch, which is on the Lord and Arts channel, and one of the stories that was featured was of a girl who accidentally was strangled with a shoelace, and the shoelace was tied to a mailbox. And, I mean, to this day, perhaps it's still debated whether or not it was a suicide or just an absolute horrible freak accident where, again, she got tangled up in it and she fell the wrong way, and then she was asphyxiated and couldn't get out of it. Things like that are possible. So those are some interesting ways of looking at the murder of Rose Mylett, as terrible as that was. It's an absolute tragedy. She should not have lost her life. But there are possibilities that exist even outside of murder and outside of any form of foul play. which also would highly, highly indicate that Rose Mylett was not a victim of Jack the Ripper. And if I had to make a determination right now, perhaps I would say that Rose Mylett was not killed by the Ripper. And I don't want to be somebody who's just latching on to the most convenient theory that I have heard at the time. But this concept of how she wasn't even murdered by anyone, that it was just a freak accident, is something that I'm going to consider in the future. And as Fred was going through the list of the Whitechapel murders, he also brought up the Pinchin Street Torso. And this is one where the victim was not even identified. I've talked about the Thames Torso killer over the last couple weeks on Black Box Online Radio, and I'm totally willing to explore the Thames Torso mystery in the future. However, I'm really beginning to lean more and more away from the Thames Torso killer actually being responsible for Jack the Ripper's crimes. And in regards to the Pinchin Street Torso, that might be a case where I am unprepared to give my full opinion on. I would definitely need to evaluate the information more, or think it over more, do some more research on the Pinchin Street Torso case. But in regards to Jack the Ripper and the Thames Torso killer being the same, both killers operated around the same time frames. We're talking 1887, 1888, and 1889. But I have to give a shout out to one of you guys in the comments section who left something very good on last week's episode, and this one is going to Nicole LNC75, who says, "New to your channel and loving it. I don't feel Jack the Ripper and the Torso murderer are the same person, just because of Mary Kelly. We saw what Jack the Ripper did when he had alone time in a private place." And this is one that would be worthy of the Comment of the Week award. On Zodiac Monday, I frequently give out awards for the Comment of the Week. I didn't give one last week, so why don't you get an award for the Comment of the Week now, Nicole LNC75? And of course, every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer, which you guys can tune in for on Black Box Online Radio. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and it's also 100% free. But in terms of the operations of the Thames Torso killer, it seems like that killer had the opportunity to have privacy with the victims, the luxury of time. They had the opportunity to dismember the victims' bodies and then discard them in various places. Jack the Ripper did almost none of that. Jack the Ripper disemboweled the victims. He didn't cut off their arms and limbs, and he left the victims where they were. This should also indicate that Mary Kelly was a victim of Jack the Ripper. She was disemboweled, her organs were pulled out, similarly to the other Ripper victims, but she was left exactly where she was. She was in her own room. And if Mary Kelly were indeed a victim of Jack the Ripper, then I think Nicole is spot on. When the Ripper had the luxury of time, he did not commit that crime in any similar way to the Thames Torso murders. I mean, he didn't cut off her arms and limbs and then throw them in the river. No, nothing of the sort. Mary Kelly's heart was stolen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the Thames Torso killer and Jack the Ripper were the same. So I have a bigger and bigger divide in my mind about how these two killers could be the same person, and I am prepared to go through more books about the Thames Torso killers. I've talked about R. Michael Gordon's book, as well as Arm of Eve by Sarah Bax Horton, but at the same time, maybe that should be done in somewhat of a true crime analysis type of way, where the Thames Torso killer is just treated as a different unsolved mystery. But ultimately, to conclude the Trading Post discussion, he brought up the murder of Alice Mackenzie. And Alice Mackenzie was murdered in 1889, and out of all of the unconfirmed crimes, aside from Martha Tabram, I would say that Alice Mackenzie perhaps has the highest chance of actually being a post-Ripper crime, although we're going into like the summer, spring of 1889, so again, that's an enormous, enormous time gap, and it's quite possible that there were just two murderers that were operating, and that, Whitechapel wasn't exactly a very safe place. And Richard Jones, once again of Jack the Ripper Tour, pointed out that our explorations into the Jack the Ripper case, like in the 21st century looking back, show us that there was a terrible time that took place in Whitechapel back in those days, and that is a set of atrocious behavior that should never exist again. And you could say this for so many people in London, even beyond Whitechapel. And as I was listening to the program The Trading Post, hosted by Fred and Noodle, and he was saying that he read off a statistic that 55% of children who were born in the East End in London in the 1880s, in London's East End, did not live past the age of 5. 55% of people who were born did not live past the age of 5. So there was an enormous mortality rate. People were dealing with horrendous conditions. And ultimately, that is just some type of terrible experiences that hopefully we will never have to see again in the 21st century and beyond. And he also told some of the stories about the sleeping conditions that people would experience when they were in these rough parts of not only the East End, but also, Whitechapel and the surrounding areas. You guys all know the famous story about the hangovers, that we use the word hangover in the English language because people would pay to hang over a clothesline, and then they would pull or undo the rope at the end of the night, and everybody would just fall to the ground. But he also told a story of how people would actually sleep in coffins. Because of the high mortality rate, they had lots of coffins that were available from undertakers, and people would pay to sleep in those as well. And this just shows you that it was a dark, twisted, and tragic time. And it's amazing that our ancestors survived it all. Well, I don't know. I mean, I expect my ancestors did some of that. Your ancestors might have been aristocrats. So some of our ancestors survived these horrible, horrible conditions. And there might be some listeners to this channel who also have royal blood. So let's see. You can always weigh in the comment section if you have any personal experiences or family stories. But I told you guys that I was also going to discuss the book Wolves in Sheep's Clothing by Michael R. King. And some of you might recognize that name from Profiling Evil. But he did an interview on the True Crime News podcast, and many of you guys know that I'm a big follower of True Crime News. I give credit to Anna Garcia for all of her accomplishments, and I'm also somebody who just lives in the true crime world. This show comes to you Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, Zodiac Monday. On Tuesdays, I talk about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, Ripper Wednesday, Dahlia Thursday about the Black Dahlia, and Cooper Friday about D.B. Cooper. I really don't watch any other TV shows outside of the true crime world. I try to sneak in a movie every now and then, but really, you might even say that this is almost getting to the point of addiction. I actually missed a dentist appointment because I wanted to watch true crime news instead. Now, don't misunderstand me. I did not want to go. Absolutely, I don't want to be in the dentist chair being tortured the way that Jack the Ripper would torture people, but at the same time, I really wanted to see this interview with Michael King where he was talking about his new book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, and I was just pulled in. And it was talking all about the behaviors of serial killers, specifically serial killers who target specific areas, and almost instantly I thought about Jack the Ripper, even more so than the Zodiac Killer. I was thinking about Jack the Ripper, because what did the Ripper do? He had an extremely small concentration of activities. They call this place the Whitechapel Murders for a reason. They call this set of mystery the Whitechapel Murders for a reason. And what Michael King was talking about when he was promoting his new book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, is that the serial killer almost enters into a type of predatory stance, the way that a lion, like specifically a lioness or another predatory cat, will just put their ears back, put their gaze down, and then they will enter into a type of kill mode where their instincts will take over. I've said this for a very long time on Black Box Online Radio. Serial killers have heightened predatory instincts. And one thing that a serial killer will do is they will stalk specific areas, not even necessarily people, but specific areas, and they will notice who's walking by the streets every day, who is entering into these buildings every day. And it can even get to the point where, okay, this is how this person walks home, this is how this person walks to work every day, so I don't even need to find where they're working. If they walk past this point at the same time every single day, this is when they're going to enter into a vulnerable place. These are going to be the vulnerable places where it is an opportune chance to target someone and attack them. And one of you guys also said this in the comment section last week about how Jack the Ripper might not have even lured women to places of his own choosing. Maybe the women who were working on the streets told him about secluded areas where they could be alone. to do some type of business. Perhaps. But it's the same concept. He would be looking for people in vulnerable places. When is this woman by herself? When is she not going to be protected by anyone? When is she going to walk down a dark alley? And I absolutely think that that's the way that the Ripper was operating. And the host of the program, Anna Garcia of True Crime News, just said, I mean, I know that you wrote this book, Michael R. King, but that sounds like a load of bunk. This whole comparison between serial killers and large predatory cats, she said that it was bunk. Some people might use the term nonsense instead of bunk, but the host laughed for a little bit, and he's like, well, why do you think it's bunk? And she said, a large predatory cat is killing primarily for two reasons. Food and defense, like food and security. They're trying to fight off other predators, but mostly they're killing for food. And this is absolutely not what serial killers are doing. There is a very pleasurable aspect of this for the serial killer in their brain. It's also just stimulation. It can be releasing rage, unleashing rage. And I was just so bothered by that. And the host, the guest, Michael King, who's promoting his new book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, absolutely said something that was clear as day. That the more we study animals, the more we find that animals do indeed commit crimes, not even crimes, they commit acts of killing because of emotions, or they commit acts of killing for unnecessary reasons. They commit acts of killing with specific targets with no real benefit other than killing for the sake of killing. And I'm so glad he said that, because the more that I hear stories about animal behavior, I find that these things are true. It used to be like, human beings are the only animals that are going to kill their own kind for disputes over emotions. I mean, that makes sense, right? Then it turns out, okay, well, maybe certain apes like chimpanzees and baboons can also kill because of emotions, and they can also get angry and kill for no food-related reason or no security-based reason, right? So, okay, so humans, then chimpanzees and baboons, maybe other types of apes. Oh, and then it turns out wolverines can actually kill because of emotional-based reasons. And I don't mean anything comic book related or Michigan related, but then, yes, Wolverines can do that too. And then you're just going to find more and more examples of animals that can kill for these types of emotional-based reasons. And that's what serial killers are doing. Just the ears going back, the eyes going down, and they are zoning in on a particular person. This can be done very quickly with an impulsive serial killer. But I'm not necessarily thinking that that's what Jack the Ripper is doing, and I'm also thinking that Michael King might be onto something in relation to Jack the Ripper. That Jack the Ripper is actually showing a lot of awareness about the crime scenes, the locations, stalking the areas, paying specific and close detail to what's happening. And what does this mean? What is this takeaway? What is the entire takeaway from this? Looking at a suspect like Aaron Kosminski, he might be less viable. The prime suspect in the Jack the Ripper case, Aaron Kosminski, was a schizophrenic. And for a long time, I was really open to the possibility that the reason why these women were mutilated so extensively was these could be schizophrenic episodes. And according to everything that Michael King just shared in his study of serial killer behavior, that almost seems to be a little bit less likely, and that this could actually be just somebody who is extremely calculating. Yes, they're unleashing rage. Yes, they probably have some very, very intense traumatic experience in their life. They have this unhealed childhood trauma, which comes from a bad relationship with women. Almost certainly Jack the Ripper had some type of problem with women in his life. The victims were female, and their bodies were mutilated. Enough said. But in terms of this type of mental health issue, maybe Kosminski isn't as strong of a suspect as I thought in the past. But how about somebody like David Cohen? Another extremely mentally ill suspect who was institutionalized, reported to have been violent. And after I listened to that recent interview with the late Martin Fido, whom I just mentioned, yes, he hosted Murder After Midnight, but I heard an interview with him on the Rippercast recently. And he was talking all about David Cohen's violent behavior, but again, if somebody is mentally ill to that point where they just had no control of their faculties, they definitely wouldn't fit into this mold of someone who is putting on a ruse and talking and walking with the victims to the secluded areas, knowing that they're in the vulnerable places. All of that shows somebody who is completely aware of their surroundings. In fact, maybe even more aware of their surroundings than the average person. So, and when people encounter these types of schizophrenic or extremely mentally ill Jack the Ripper suspects, then they might be going down a little bit in the book. And how about somebody like Chaim Hyams, who was an alcoholic, and he might have been experiencing mania after his epileptic seizures, but again, mania, alcoholism, all of this stuff would mean that he was not aware of his mental faculties. Now, this is not a show where I just throw out endorsements of suspects and be like, okay, this is my top suspect for the week. No. This is one where we are actually talking about the evidence. And it's entirely possible what I have just said in this episode does not eliminate any of the suspects that I've just mentioned. It just gives me a little bit of doubt. It's entirely possible that Chaim Hyams was Jack the Ripper, and everything that Sarah Bax Horton said in her book, One-Armed Jack, is correct. I mean, we're just talking about trying to weigh the merit of the ideas. But then, what's another major takeaway from everything that we've just said? Stalking the areas, paying attention to routines, looking for vulnerable people in vulnerable places. What does that also suggest? More and more, that looks like Jack the Ripper was a Whitechapel resident, someone with intimate familiarity with the streets of Whitechapel. So all of the stuff about, like, Lewis Carroll coming in from France, or how about Edgar Degas coming in from France to just kind of hang out for the day and then go back, stuff like that becomes less and less viable in terms of the way that Michael King was describing the actions of a serial killer who would be stalking the victims. And let's be clear, Jack the Ripper did isolate his victims, no matter what. He killed them in relatively uninterrupted ways. So perhaps somebody could be looking at this situation and just be thinking, I mean, maybe the Ripper just got lucky and he is just some crazy guy roaming about, and then someone says, hey, come here, and then he just stabs her. I mean, maybe, but that's definitely lower on the probability scale for me. So I would really love to know what you think about anything in this episode. And to be clear, this episode was designed to be a combination of different ideas to talk about the Trading Post video as well as Michael King's appearance on True Crime News promoting his new book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. And he chose the name Wolf for a reason. Did you notice that everything that I was saying about animal examples had nothing to do with wolves? Because it's all about the concept of deception and things that are not going to be blatantly obvious. And, I mean, one of the reasons why he wrote the book was he said that he wanted to make it available to true crime enthusiasts like you and me, and he wanted that to be done so people can understand certain aspects of serial killer behavior, but there are lots of books out there that do that. What this book was designed to do was to show you how can you just be aware of your surroundings and incorporate that into your daily life to do these types of situational awareness measures in a positive way as opposed to a destructive way. So it's very fascinating all the same, and some of you perhaps are familiar with profiling evil, but I'd love to know what you guys think about anything in the comments section. What do you think about the comments that were made by the Trading Post in regards to the unconfirmed crimes? What do you think about the Dear Boss letter? Do you think Jack the Ripper actually wrote it? And what do you think about anything in relation to the suspects that I've talked about in the Wolves in Sheep's Clothing segment about the predatory instincts and the awareness of the crime scene? I mean, I really do want to kind of use that as the biggest takeaway from this episode. Jack the Ripper is a Whitechapel resident with a strong awareness of his faculties, and perhaps maybe it's actually less likely that he had an extreme mental illness like schizophrenia and was just dealing with episodes when he was committing the murders. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I would love to read them. And you can always write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And a reminder, one more time, in addition to the Monday through Friday lineup, this show also releases shorts and reels on Facebook, Instagram, and here on YouTube. On Facebook, my name is Ned DeHaan, and on Instagram, blackboxonlineradio88. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And I will see you tomorrow for a new episode about the Black Dahlia murder. Until next time.